Recall expands to include 7 million pounds of deli
Nearly
meat.
150 sick in salmonella outbreak affecting 11
E. coli
countries.
outbreak in the U.S. kills 10 and sickens hundreds.
All these headlines about food safety. This isn't just policy, it's personal. Behind every recall, every outbreak, and every regulation, there's someone whose life was permanently changed or lost. I know that because I am one of them.
Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. I'm Jeanette Zimmer.
And I'm Dr. Darin Detweiler, former submarine guy, longtime food safety advocate, author, and someone who's been speaking up for over 3.5 decades, even when it wasn't easy or popular.
This isn't your average food safety podcast. We're not talking about bacteria and best practices. We won't be teaching you the proper temperature to cook a chicken breast.
165.
Or even how to pronounce Listeria monocytogenes.
Not even close.
We're diving into the culture, the conflicts, and the human cost of getting it wrong.
We'll share stories, some painful, some funny, all true. Revealing the real experiences of someone who's spent a lifetime behind the scenes.
These aren't stories you read about in newspapers or magazines, and they're not found on conference agendas. What they are everyday experiences of people who have dedicated their lives to making sure you have access to safe food.
Because when it comes to protecting every plate, it's not just policy and data. It's personal. And it's time we start talking about it like it is.
Welcome back to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. I kind of realized that I jumped the gun when I said we were not going to be coming back until after IAFP. There's been so many huge things going on that we decided that it was important to make this episode before we left. And we're going to talk about two things. One of the things that we want to talk about is we talked a lot in our last episode about the certainty gap, what it is and all that stuff. And we're going to spend some time later on in this episode talking about ways to narrow the certainty gap. And with that, we're going to be bringing on a guest.
Hi, I'm Laura St. John. I'm a celebrity mindset coach.
So I'm very excited to have Laura on later on in this episode. What about you, Darin?
Well, I'm excited. And at the same time, I feel like I have to confess to something.
What is that?
This is our attempt to re-record this episode.
Yes.
We actually started to record this episode
On the 17th.
on the 17th.
July 17th.
So Friday, July 17th, we recorded this episode and realized, if you're kind of aware of the timeline here, 24 hours later, 48 hours later, all the information kept changing regarding we had made some reference to the Cyclospora outbreak.
Yeah.
And even though we were trying to kind of be safe and not be too definitive because you knew there was going to be more information, it wasn't just more information. It was like flip-flop information.
Oh,
and
so much change that we basically said, we have to re-record this entire episode because even though we actually had a lot of fun recording that episode.
Well, there might be some elements we can use, but I mean, we started off talking about a disclaimer and then throw the disclaimer idea out the window. There was so much going on. And the last 2 days, we've had a lot going on in our personal lives, but surrounded all that was all the media calls. Today I was on probably 2 hours of phone calls in addition to another hour and a half or so of texting and emailing kind of a thing. And what I find amazing is not just, it's not even just about Cyclospora. The questions are about some of the bigger picture elements.
Yes, it's crazy how chaotic it's gotten.
Well, not only chaotic, but when people from major news outlets and other non-news but publication type outlets are asking you questions, it's like, don't even, they weren't even asking about Cyclospora. They were asking about social media. They were asking about data. They were asking about consumer behavior. They were asking about, have we seen anything like this in the past? And it's like, I've been talking about economics, politics, history, so many different things. It's like, college class 101.
I was just going to say, it's like you teaching one of your classes.
It is. It's crazy. But I think that the common thread is through all these conversations in the last 76 hours has been, not only trust, but how the certainty gap, which was the focus of our last episode,
Yep.
is now kind of being played out, not just amongst industry leaders and executives, but with consumers. There's so much uncertainty right now, whether it is consumers, even retailers and restaurants. Do I recall this? Do I not recall this? Do I look for this label? Do I look for some other label? What if it has this ingredient? What if it doesn't have this ingredient? What if it's from Mexico? What if it's not from Mexico? Is this a false positive, or is this data from the states important? Do I pay attention to the state data? Do I pay attention to the federal data? And I thought it was this restaurant. No, it's all these restaurants over here, but I thought it was this brand. No, it's all these brands over here as well. There's so much not cumulative, but conflicting information that keeps coming out like every 24 hours.
Well, and even just the whole, was it really a positive? Was it a false positive? Was it actually from Mexico? Was it not from Mexico? Is there a big conspiracy going on?
Oh, and like, what have you seen on social media?
Well, so I've seen a lot of people who are in defense of Taco Bell.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
Taco Bell was thrown over the bus, even though it's come out that this lettuce was distributed all over the place, but Taco Bell was the one that was getting thrown under the bus for all of this. And so there's a lot of people with this very strange defense of Taco Bell that we're not on Don't Eat Poop, so we're not going to talk about it the same way.
It's almost at like Britney Spears level. Leave Taco Bell alone.
Yes, exactly. So that's one angle that I've seen a lot of. I've seen the angle of, wait, now the CDC is saying it's a false positive. Is there a conspiracy going on here in defense?
Actually, it was the FDA.
Sorry.
Well, see, that's what's interesting, because it's not just FDA information. There's CDC information, and there's the various states involved.
Yep.
And
That's another thing that a lot of people on my feed are enraged at, the fact that a lot of these parasites are no longer being tracked in the way that they were being tracked previously.
oh, there are so many different levels of rage. Not only that, but there's anger about the fact that certain testing and treatment and monitoring has gone away. There's anger about people finding out that, wait, so the same bag of lettuce that I pay $12 for at this store is
Exactly the
sold
same
from the
for
same
$4 at another store.
Yeah, that kind of economic rage. Why have I been paying extra thinking it was premium and it's the same exact stuff?
Yep.
Or the rage against, the idea of just this general feeling of like we're being duped here kind of a thing.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a whole generation of food safety a-holes that are starting to emerge.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are people who I follow who don't normally talk about food. And there are people who are like, hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and I'm a specialist in this, and let me tell you my angle on this. But when you hear some of these other people that are like, yeah, pay attention to what's being said over here. Look at what this company is saying, and let's break down what they're not saying. And what about this? And look at his donations, and look at this, and that kind of stuff. And it's like, I think that in a bigger picture, there's not only uncertainty
Yeah.
and trust issues. I think we have to always remember that we as consumers vote with our food money.
Yep.
And as much as we want to think that we are educated voters in the polls, it's important for us to be educated voters with our food money. Do we buy from this company, from that grocery store? Do we go to that restaurant? Do we do this? Because if we spend our money on those things, it's as if we're telling them that is okay. We agree. And in this case, it's like a food safety thing. But in other cases, it's about like, your CEO is racist, or your CEO is sexist, or you're against the things that I support, or you're for the things that I detest.
Yeah.
It may not have anything to do with food safety or quality,
Right.
but it's who you do business with and who your money ends up going to that you
Right.
start thinking about. And I think that this is one of those inflection points where we've gone from the viral, exploding diarrhea terminology,
Yep.
which, by the way, we just came from not too long ago was the radioactive shrimp.
Yep.
And that went viral. And even much more recently, remember with all the international visitors
Oh,
for
yeah,
FIFA?
yeah. We were going to talk about that. Somebody beat us to it, but just the amazing, like, people who were coming out for FIFA and the World Cup and going to our restaurants here in the United States, shocked
Oh, that's
by how
ranch
good our food
dressing.
is.
Oh, that's chicken and waffles. Oh, that's barbecue. This. Oh, that's how
Yes.
you eat a rib. Oh, that's this kind of food.
Yeah,
And can I
yeah.
take it back to my country when I go home?
Yeah.
And we went through this cycle of the kind of viral food social media content that was very positive.
Yes.
And, a win-win situation for the consumer, for the viewer, for the companies, all
For
that kind
the
of stuff.
restaurants.
Yeah, and now we're in something where it's not a win-win.
No, in fact, didn't Yum Brands take like a massive hit in their stock prices because
They did, because Yum Brands is the parent company that owns Taco Bell. Now, I will tell you, this is almost like a disclosure. I've done work with some very fine people within Yum Brands.
yeah,
The amount of proactive leadership and training and investments they put in to food safety is not only notable, but commendable.
yeah,
And we have to remember that these, in this case, a parasite, normally when we talk about pathogens, bacteria, they don't discriminate. They don't care if you're a big company, small company, you're in a red state, a blue state, you're a, whatever it is, you're this kind of food, that kind of food, you're this educated, that educated. They don't discriminate.
yeah.
Just like people, everyone can become impacted, but some more than others.
Well, yeah, and that was one thing that you were bringing up to me too that I think was a really, really important point. There are people out there on social media talking about, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, so you get the runs for a little bit and that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, you are a healthy adult
Now,
right now, yes, but you are only speaking for healthy adults, which means that you're putting this message across so irresponsibly because there are people who will also eat this food and get sick, but because they are of a vulnerable population.
yeah, they've got a pre-existing health, condition, compromised immune system. Maybe they're pregnant, very young, elderly. They may get the quote unquote explosive diarrhea as well. But what if that exacerbates other medical conditions?
Right.
What if that complicates a pregnancy? What if that thwarts medical treatment for something else?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Had that little confession myself of being a food safety a-hole, which I think is really hilarious because on Don't Eat Me Poop, I made it a big deal that you are the food safety a-hole and I'm the one who eggs you on. But in fact, I do have my moments. And one of them was a woman on Instagram Reels who was touting, oh, you'll be fine as long as you wash all your food in, what was it? Baking soda and vinegar.
Yeah. I've also
Yeah.
seen videos where they're like, or hydrogen peroxide, or
Yes.
Dawn dish soap, or
Right.
Windex.
And it's like, really?
Windex.
Do you really want to be consuming Windex? Really?
Well, on top of that, you know what they were doing in these videos where they were like, they just emptied out their sink and threw the lettuce into the sink. It's like, I would never,
That's really gross too.
never do that.
But my a-holy thing really came down to I called her out on there. And she said the phrase that I absolutely despise. Her only response, because she doesn't want to have a genuine dialogue, when I said the only thing that's proven to actually kill these parasites would be heat. Cook your food and that will kill it. But she said, agree to disagree.
Ooh.
I hate that phrase. It's
Can we insert the nail on chalkboard sound
yes,
here?
that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's seriously one of those things where it's like agree to disagree is I don't really want to deal with the fact that you're calling me out on these lies that I am touting for views and pretending that there's scientific research behind just use baking soda and vinegar and it will take the parasites away. And instead, I'm going to agree to disagree with you on this scientific point. That's not what agree to disagree is.
Yeah.
And just not being willing to even have a discussion of maybe you shouldn't be posting this on the internet because there are people who will believe you, will do this, and will get sick.
Oh, and the person who posts that will feel no guilt whatsoever.
No, she won't even know that person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's consequences.
Yeah.
Well, we've thrown your mother under the bus
Several times in this podcast.
Well, we're going to do it again. I actually reached out to her on Saturday when I was waiting for something. I was in the car waiting for something. I was sitting in a parking lot. I gave your mom a call because I know that she often has items in her pantry and her fridge that sit around for a while. And I wanted her to know that it's not just with this brand labeling on it to look for this. And we were talking about it, and she walks over with her phone, and sure enough, she goes, "Oh, I think I shouldn't use this. I was going to use this, tonight. Maybe I shouldn't use this." I'm like, "Yeah, you might want to reconsider it." I wonder how many people will use what's in their fridge because it's already there and they already spent money on it, and it's too much of a hassle to change their plans or to take it back to a grocery store.
I'll take my chances.
I'll take my
If you're a healthy adult, you be you, whatever you want to have that. But if you have any of that vulnerable population living in your house, don't take the chance. Don't risk it with them. Don't risk it with their health or their lives, Well,
I'd rather be wrong and unnecessary than wrong and having missed an opportunity to prevent myself or others from getting sick. It would devastate me if I, served food that got someone sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Crazy.
Hence the vindication that Darin never has ever purchased bagged lettuce and brought it into our households. It's one of the things that he always tells people, I never buy bagged lettuce.
So, I've had so many conversations. I can't tell you when it was, if it was yesterday or the day before, but in one of the conversations, kind of going down the process here, the idea that the lettuce is, harvested, it's taken to a central processing facility, it's clean, it goes through a rinse of some type, it goes on a conveyor belt, and then it is sliced up and shredded and then put into a large vat or whatever, large feeder that goes into these 10, 12-pound bags or whatever. And some of the questions are, wait, so at a restaurant, they don't necessarily have just a head of lettuce that they shred themselves? No, that's a bag full of many heads of lettuce that have been shredded and put together in a centralized way. Wait, so even that bag is more than one head of lettuce? I'm like, well, have you ever seen a 10 or 12-pound head of lettuce? What do you think, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me back.
Wait, but weren't you just talking to a colleague who runs a food safety program at a major restaurant?
Oh, yeah. So again, what I do in connections, I got a phone call from a guy who's a VP at a major nationwide chain, and he was talking with me. And one of the kind of side comments was, man, I am so glad way back when that, I enforced this decision that we've used ever since, that we never get the pre-bag stuff. We get a fresh, untouched head, and we prepare it ourselves.
Yeah. Because
we want to make sure, because it's not just the thing. It's not just like the shredded lettuce or salad lettuce, if you will. You know how you get sometimes you get a side dish and it's on top of some lettuce.
Yeah.
Whether it's shredded or leaf. So
Right.
now that lettuce, even though it's not an ingredient, if you will, for your...
It's like a garnish.
or part of the dish kind of a thing, right? But it reminds me of the conversation I had years ago when people were shocked when I said, if you go to the grocery store and buy a pound of ground beef, the styrofoam tray and the plastic wrap around it, that's not from one animal. And people are like, no.
Right.
It's like, there's
it
upwards of 400 head of
them.
Unless you buy a steak and grind it yourself or have someone grind it for you, you're getting product from multiple heads of cattle.
Yeah.
Unless you buy a head of lettuce and bring it home and chop it yourself. If you buy a pre-mixed bag, it's multiple heads, in some cases of different types, even from different locations where they were grown, kind of a thing. So we get farther and farther from the true source. And also, before we move on, all these steps I talked about in terms of going from the head of lettuce to the centralized shredding and bagging, those are technically levels of processing. So when we talk about ultra processed and highly processed foods in a spectrum of 0 to 4 or 5 or whatever,
Right.
realize that that is a level of processing that's more than the restaurant that takes their own head of lettuce and chops it themselves, or
Right.
we at home does it.
It's funny because as you were saying that, it made me think of the fact that when people talk about like ultra processed food or any of that kind of thing, they only think about it in terms of what chemicals or additives or other
Yeah.
ingredients might be put inside of it. They don't talk about the actual physical processing of that food.
Well, I continue to be not shocked by the people that'll talk about calories or gluten or ultra processed food, and then if you ask them to define it, they can't.
No.
It's so hard to define some of these things, and perhaps there's a reason why it's hard to define these things. We'll argue these, we'll put them on the political, debate, if you will. Where's your stance on this? What are you doing about this? And yet we won't actually define these things. And yet, there's an aisle of this, at the store or whatever. We see it all the time, but we just don't think about it as this, because the pictures that usually associate these things are the farmer and his
Right.
family on
Right.
the, and the home farm. And well, look what even we saw on Saturday. We're a small family-owned business kind of a thing.
And
Okay,
it's like, oh yeah, you're in multiple countries and like so many facilities. You are not
Yeah.
a small family
but
farm.
it's projected, and we want to buy in as a society, as a culture, that
Yeah.
it's innocent and it's small farm and it's local. When
Right,
it's
right.
not. Even lettuce.
Right. So would you say go to your local farmer's market?
Yeah. Do you remember during the pandemic when we started going to those kind of local farms and we would buy the box of stuff online and get the
Yeah.
QR code, and we would show up because we were right there. The farm food.
Oh
was
yeah, I
grown
remember
right
that.
there.
Yeah, when we were still in Massachusetts.
Yeah. If it comes down to anything, the idea of trust, again, removing the certainty gap, if we get from a farmer's market or a co-op or just go straight to the farm, okay, sometimes those tomatoes don't look perfect or the cucumbers look a little wonky or whatever.
Yep.
But you know what we always find out?
What?
A, it's not from very far away. B, it was picked yesterday or the day before. 3, it's some of the best tasting produce we've put
Absolutely.
into salads or spaghetti sauces or things like that. We have never regretted
You're right.
getting food
Getting
from
food
our local
from,
sources.
Yeah, from the local farmer's market or
And
whatnot.
whether it's a trust issue or just an overall quality, it's not something that's sat in a warehouse for 6 weeks or something like that. And we don't know, but we have that. I predict that this whole last week may end up pushing more people to saying, I think it's worth it to go to the local farmer's market.
Yeah.
And ask questions and have that level of certainty and remove as much doubt as I can in terms of what I'm bringing into my home. And also that idea of I'd rather vote with my food money and go to something I have a little bit more trust with than something that put me in a position of having that doubt.
Yeah. No, that's true. Well, speaking of certainty, one of the reasons why you wanted to do this episode early was because you had an idea for talking about this last episode. We spoke about what the certainty gap is. And so, when we were talking about this, you said, I really want to do a follow-up episode where we talk more about ways to narrow the certainty gap.
Right. There will always be failures in terms of food safety. There'll always be bacteria. But we know that we can take steps, we can be proactive, and we can work through how to deal with these things. there's always going to be uncertainty. There's always going to be a certainty gap. We're not instantaneous with everything we do. There's always going to be a time between when we know or we think we need to do something and when we take action. I've been dealing with something where I'm glad there was a delay because more information was found out. And if we had acted too quickly, this is like a business thing we were doing. If we had acted too quickly, we might have taken a wrong step.
Yeah.
But there are times where it's not about there must be perfect information, right? There's ability to make decisions and take actions even with imperfect information. But I think that having gone through some steps individually and as a team in terms of how do we process going through these certainty gaps is important. And we last week, midweek, because the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan's coming out.
Yep.
You wanted to watch some of his other films.
Yes.
And we watched
Oppenheimer. Which I had not watched up to that point.
Yeah, neither had I. And there was a scene that kind of caught me off guard.
Well, and it caught you off guard because of something that you and I had been talking about a lot, which is how oftentimes you make decisions based on your spectrum of knowledge. Right? So you have a lived experience now. I have my lived experience and you have your lived experience. And combining those two experiences, we've widened our spectrum for making decisions of, it's kind of like, as human beings, we can see a certain spectrum of color, but if you look through a cat or a dog's eyes, they see a completely different spectrum of color, right? So people see from different spectrums to make their decisions based on their lived experiences. So I've become moderately obsessed with this idea of what can I do to widen this spectrum of knowledge. And the interesting part for you when we were watching Oppenheimer was...
Well, he was early in his academic career at some point. He was in Europe and he was really trying to grasp onto some conceptual, almost like visualizations of mathematical
and physics.
And he was going to art galleries and museums and looking at art for different ways of looking at light and movement and things of that nature. And I was drawn first to our conversation around, the spectrum and visualizations, but I was also drawn to a conversation from years back with Dr. Bob Ballard. Mm-hmm. He's the guy that found the Titanic.
Right.
And there's a really
he's kind of a bit of a hero of yours.
Yeah, he's a bit of a hero to me. And there's a really cool backstory, but that's not the point I want to get to. He was down there in these remote submersibles and he was surrounded by these other scientists and engineers, and he realized that they didn't have enough information to be as effective as they wanted to be. They needed archaeologists and historians and geographers and stuff. Right. And so he literally said, we need to hire more people to our team. We want someone with a degree in the sciences and the degree in the humanities. And thousands of people signed up for these jobs, but literally only 3 or 4 were qualified because they had their feet in both disciplines.
Right.
Or any 2 disciplines, quite honestly. And so that idea of, can we go beyond food safety, beyond leadership, and say, okay, if we're looking at certainty gap, if we're looking at how do we build some muscle memory or some tools around this, I was immediately drawn back to what we have been doing in our personal lives.
Yeah. So the last several years, Darin and I have been working with a mindset coach, and it's truly enhanced our lives. Working with Laura St. John has been kind of eye-opening experience for just not only how we make our way through the world, but also how we navigate our marriage and how we make decisions personally as well as professionally. And she's been phenomenal. We first saw her. What's hilarious is back in 2020 during the pandemic, our guilty pleasure was the TV show Selling Sunset. And I was obsessed with watching this show because I loved seeing, this was when we were still living in Massachusetts, and it made me happy to see the California beaches and the houses in LA and the overviews of the Santa Monica Mountains and just so much of California. And I absolutely attribute it to one of the reasons we decided to come home. But on one episode, they featured Laura St. John. And I heard her and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, huh? But then about a year later, after we moved back to California, she popped up on my TikTok feed. This was when I was still using TikTok, and she popped up on my feed. And so I started listening to it a little bit more about what she had to say. And I thought, oh, this really kind of resonates with me. I'm really interested in this. So I signed up for a class, and I did. She has like a 6-week course that she does, and did the 6-week course. And I thought, this is really cool. These are some tools that really, really help in just navigating a lot of different situations.
Well, I have to admit, you said, hey, let's do this together. And today we're one of the few married couples that are doing this as a team.
Yes.
I was very skeptical at first. Very skeptical. But the thing is,
yeah,
is that,
and you didn't really have a choice. I did kind of say, so I took this class. I love this class. You're going to take it with me next time.
I think the thing for me was that it wasn't about answers as much as it was the tools and going through steps and asking yourself certain questions. And we have had some wonderful opportunities to engage in conversation using some of these tools and to do everything from future casting to breaking down experience to even just communicating to the universe what is, what is our priority, what is, the thing that we want kind of a thing. And in doing that, though, you have to have clarity. And if you're not defining what does it look like, what does it sound like, what is failure?
What does it feel like? Yeah.
What is failure? How do you measure that or whatever? If you're not truly identifying these things, then what she ended up saying, I think, is pretty cool. How will you know when you're there if you had no idea what you're looking for?
Right.
And it really worked for me.
Yeah, and that was so the whole reason of bringing her on board was you talking about the certainty gap and connecting the tools that she's been teaching to narrowing the certainty gap. And we're like, well, why don't we just put her on the episode?
Yeah. I mean, I've said before that even C-suite executives, they're still consumers. Well, guess what? Everyone who works in the food industry is a consumer, but we're also people.
Yeah.
And so the idea of how people work, if we can't figure out if we can't figure out how we work as a person, as a human, then how are we supposed to be effective as a leader? Right. So I thought it would be really good to bring her in to kind of talk about this, but through this different perspective as we stretch our spectrum about talking about this.
Yeah. So without further ado, here is our interview with Laura St. John. Hi, Laura. Welcome. Welcome to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. We're so excited to have you on this episode.
I'm so excited to be here.
It's so great to bring you in to kind of not necessarily shed light on it, but help us grasp this idea of, look, we will always find ourselves in situations, and the worst time to be trying to figure out what to do in an emergency or when a crisis is afoot is now to try to be like, hey, I need to learn some skills. I need to gather some tools.
Emergency is the worst period of time to learn stuff that you should do while there's an emergency.
I just got off a plane the other day, and they tell you about how to get off the plane in an emergency before
the plane takes off.
You take off, because if you're trying to do that in the middle, it's going to be madness and mayhem in the aisles as you're trying to be like, do this, now follow the lights kind of a thing. So we have been talking about the certainty gap in a very industry executive leadership context. But the entire time I've been thinking about it in terms of those parallels and those lessons we've learned on a very individual level, working with you and with Strong Confident Living.
Well, I appreciate being here. That gap is real. And, most people, even whether it's companies, elite athletes, sometimes you get, as a mindset coach, the SOS call also in the midst of, I'm going out on this big next step and what should I do? And I'm like, OMG, it would have been great to have started this mindset work proactively weeks or months ago because you may not have even been in this place.
Great point. And I think that sometimes, and I definitely have examined this many times in the years working with you, sometimes you have this idea of the finish line, but it's so far from reality, or your description of it is incomplete. You've got this idyllic, simple version of it, but you, in your talking through, are asking people to think like, what would you experience when you achieve that, when you get to that point? And I think that that is one part of the equation in terms of, we say we prioritize food safety, or this is our goal, this is our mission, but do people really know what it means to achieve that? And I think that's one of the first things I learned from you is being clear about what you're truly trying to achieve. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And I would imagine that that is something that so many people that work with you deal with on like day one. Their definition of what success is has to be rethought.
Absolutely. Most people take action to avoid what they do not want much more like trained or effectively than stepping into what they do want. And it really just is a mindset shift because if you can really flip it, like one of my signature tools, and take action toward what you do want, it is the same actions, in terms of safety and precautions, but it's done with a different intent. So it's not just the timing of when it's being done, but it's the intention behind it. I always give the example because people understand it sometimes outside the scope of food safety, which is, you can go into a place to work out. Are you working out to undo your body? Are you working out to step into a body you love? And it's a great example. Are you now trying to get more safe in food because you're trying to undo the problem of what's not going right? Or are you stepping into safety and being guardian of the people that you want to serve? Same actions, but done with a different intent. So if it's done in the SOS mode, it's highly likely to be doing it from the energy of the problem, which is like an intent that keeps it circulating. You will, from a mindset perspective, be more likely to keep re-engaging in the same negative outcome because of the intent in which you're trying to fix the problem versus step into the place that the company should be going from the beginning.
You mentioned something that I've often thought of in a different context. In the world of food safety, we talk about likelihood and severity, and you have to measure those to understand how big a problem is or can be. You talk about the energy of the problem and solution in a very similar context. What do you keep telling people about the energy of the solution and the energy of the problem?
It's so important when you're even in the energy of the problem. The thing that you want to fix is usually filled with a lot of fear, a lot of void, a lot of problem energy. It's very clear when the problem is bubbling up, it's arising, it's in front of you, and it creates a lot of fear and panic. We see it all the time as it hits the news and everyone's worried about what to do next. And now all these actions are taken in fear. And then, what seems to be the solution, which is to patch up the problem, is done again in the energy of the problem. So when I step in as a mindset coach, especially when I love like working with you and leaders and companies, it's like, let's take a quick look first at what the problem is, what we clearly do not want. And then what is the flip side to that? What we clearly do want, right? Which is safety and security and health. And then the energy of the action is it's done again with a different intent. And it's very difficult for people to go to solution-based energy when they're in the SOS moment. So the real player here in terms of creating massive change, dramatic change quickly, is once this current problem that's, surfacing all over, like bubbles down, okay, like just bubbles back down. That is the most important time to do the work. As a mindset coach, I train people, like you can work with a child while they're having a temper tantrum, but they probably like can't really hear you. It's better off to like let that, simmer down and, still talk about it, still look at like whatever's the problem, but don't address it fully until it boils itself down a little bit, because that's going to create the real solution of change. So whatever might be happening today might be in this like fix it storm, and it might start the negative motivation, which is to prong people into action. But the real sustainable flip will happen days or weeks later. And that's where we want to capture, the hearts and minds of people who can make these powerful decisions and decide in the energy of now moving forward what needs to change now, not to fix, but to create. And it's a very different energy. Most people are in the fix it mode, which comes from insecurity and fear, versus the creative energy, which is like, now that we've gone back to neutral, just at least in a mindset, but does not diminish what just happened. It does not diminish the size or scope of the problem. But if you can go back as leaders in a room to the energy of neutral, which is just matter of fact, powerful, clear, you can really start to look at what needs to be changed in the now moving forward. That's highly creative. This is where other solutions, other paths might appear, new discussions, because now it's a highly creative discussion versus a fix the problem discussion.
Well, I love that idea of the discussion because, Jeanette and I, we were in band and drill team together back in high school.
He was not on drill team.
I was
on drill team. He was in band.
Right. And I remember the saying, practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect, with the band. And when I was in the military, it was like drill like it's the real thing. You don't drill like it's fun and games, because when it is real, right, you have to have that muscle memory. You have to have that energy, like you're talking about, in terms of now we're in this fire, we're in this flooding, we're in this emergency situation. So when we have companies that at, at one point they don't take things seriously, and then all of a sudden there's a major outbreak, a major recall, it's hard to kind of flip on that dime and say, guys, we have to take this serious now. You should have been taking it serious all along. And if you had that clear mindset, if you will, and you were communicating those goals clearly to your entire team, your entire workforce, and you were also communicating and demonstrating, like you said, that energy as a leader, that's going to help set up those people around you to kind of match that in terms of how serious it is, how important it is for us to collectively achieve these goals.
It really helps when people tap into the courage. It takes a few leaders. I always say a few people leading with their hearts can outweigh a ton of people just leading only with their heads, because what's happening when, food is in crisis mode impacts people at a really deep, heartfelt level. It impacts brands, it impacts families' lives, and it takes courage, which is that line of courage, in the flip it, to flip that energy from negative to positive. It takes a few people ready to carry that torch forward as company leaders or as decision or policymakers to decide, like, this is like, I'm going to stand up for this. I'm going to stand up for the now moving forward. I'm going to create the change. I'll be one of those big, big change makers. And it takes courage. It takes courage. It's almost sometimes easier for human nature to just sit and wait Even when you gave the analogy earlier of the airplane, I was actually just in the exit row twice pretty recently, and I'm like, who am I gonna be? If this if this goes down, I'm gonna be the
Yeah.
one. I'll open the. I'm already. I joked around with the person next to me because we looked around at the people who's not paying any attention. Right, it's very equivalent to what's going on, and I listen enough, but I look at the exit and I look at the people around me and I'm like, who's going to be those people if in case of emergency there was one. And
Yeah.
when you see there's 3 rows and there might be 2 or 3 people, that's who you're looking for. And that
Right.
can start to create the momentum for companies and policies to start making these shifts. It doesn't have to be everybody. It has to be those few people that are taking charge. Encourage.
So taking that analogy, because most of this conversation has been kind of through the lens of, okay, the food safety failure has already happened, right? But let's just move the timeline up to, let's say a corporation comes to you from a mindset perspective. They're like, okay, we're in an industry where food safety failures occur and we're doing what we can to prevent it, um but we know that it's a potentiality down the line that something does come. So what can we do from a mindset perspective to, we've got the drills, we've got the protocols, but we want to do it from a mindset perspective. What would you suggest that we do ahead of time so that when we are in the fire, we can keep cool heads and they would prevail?
It is the equivalent, I coach a lot of elite athletes, so sometimes it's very helpful to give these other examples outside of it. It is the
Yes.
equivalent of having a massive fail, right, at a big game, to then how do I go back and now step up into something and actually win, like knock it out of the park kind of win. And it requires a shift in thinking. I know you are familiar with my leadership lessons, but something that's very important is the big idea thinking concepts, because if you're not expanding yourself and your thought process as a company or as an entity beyond the thoughts that have already existed, then you're not going to create a new solution. So the thoughts of where people have been locked into the path that they think is based on reality to date needs to be challenged. And once you start challenging the thoughts that have always been, which there's a percentage, okay, well, maybe that's not good enough. Maybe that was good enough until this year, but what if you raised the bar? What if you expanded your mindset and thoughts beyond the path as a company you think you're currently locked into, given the circumstances to date? What if things got worse? What if things got better? When you start organizing thoughts around, situations not in fear, creative solutions can appear. There can be other paths. So the work really starts post, like this was saying, you don't have to, we now know like these things do happen in our current reality. Like probably you can look at the science and you probably know as experts in this field how often a big thing erupts. Do you know like how often-ish a big thing
There's
erupts?
been more recalls than there are days in the year of late, and in terms of outbreaks, so many of these outbreaks, even like the current one with Cyclospora, we're talking over 30 some odd states because of the nature of how it was distributed. So sometimes it's not so much the quantity of events as much as it is the scope and scale of these events that we have to pay attention to. And it just seems that more and more and more as we go along.
The scope and scale's getting bigger.
Yeah.
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 Well, with awareness, ending can be changed. And what's happening in today's social media, when the outbreaks first started happening, like my sons, I was on TikTok, like you start like Googling, you start looking at all the different like real life examples, who's saying different things, and can I eat this salad, like waif right here? And I, of course, immediately thought of you. And it's like, wow, this is happening in people's pockets now. Like this, years ago, it might have just been televised, big news, but this is happening and word circulates, friends, family, even in other countries can like chime in, and it's a big thing. So now knowing that it's a constant momentum of an undercurrent that's happening, it's clear that awareness, which is part of mindset, is critical. And now we're aware. And now the next step is really stretching the thoughts to a new limit, like, because clearly, if it's not been solved, there are other creative solutions to be discovered, right? Other conversations to be had. And that's where the flip it tool that I've developed, that method of like, okay, what's the problem? What's the solution? I've seen even attorneys use my method of flip it. And instead of like putting out the fires, I'm like, of a huge company, they stepped into being guardian of the documents they were creating to protect the company or protect the people. And it shifts from, again, the problem energy to this, what I call guardian of the vision. And that requires a really clear vision. It requires people, but it doesn't even have to be everybody. It requires people to believe in a better vision, to not accept the status quo, to not say, well, this percentage, it's always been this way, so that's how it's going to be. It requires the people who are ready to stretch their brain, honestly, to their heart's dimensions, because their name or brand with a devastating, like, story, not just what hits headlines, but what happens when you hit your pillow at the end of the night, like to know that they knew and didn't do something, like that should really play a toll on people's hearts. And the people who want to create that change will rise to the top. That cream will rise to the top. That's why you don't have to convince, you don't have to prove, you just have to start casting this incredible vision that's impeccable. That's like such a high expectation. And the people who meet you there will want to meet you there and start that kind of dialogue.
Nice.
Before we lose you, it seems like so much emphasis is put on, what does it say in the job description, or, what does it say in the corporate manual?
Right.
And those are tools, and those are part of the, the foundation of things. But it really does take this idea of having the image of and working towards this idea of what does success look like, and even what does failure look like. If you can't define failure, then how can you deal with failure? But it sounds to me like there's a lot of work that goes in terms of, it's not so much hiring the person who can do what the book says, but it's also about hiring the person who can have this healthy vision of success,
Right.
have this ability to embrace it and to communicate it and to build those skill sets and even muscle memory of the team around them, that they're always focused on it with the right energy, such that when the moment comes that now we're dealing with a crisis mode, all of a sudden you're not trying to get the clown that comes out of the clown card to be the hero.
Right.
If you were the hero
And,
all along, I
all
was
the
gonna say, if you were the
finger
hero
pointing.
all along, if that was your mindset, then people are going to treat you like that.
Yeah.
Right. All the finger pointing that happens, like because of like whose role was this. Let's now look at basically the legal documentation of whose responsibility this is, which again goes back to the more legal world of, guardianship and protecting versus putting a fire out. And a lot of this energy is spent pointing fingers, pointing blame, looking outside ourselves for the negative instead of like grabbing people and running to like create the change that this is obviously pointing us to, so that the world at some point has to get so sick and tired of hearing these things on the news over and over and over again. So it's both top down and bottom up, because people are sick and tired of it and it shouldn't be happening. And we all know that, especially when you see stories where people knew and yet, this negative was still like being tolerated. So as soon as there's a crossing of a threshold where this negative is just not tolerable, right? This is in a matter of fact way. you can start to make that really courageous flip in a very matter-of-fact energy of what is true, like what should be done here. Let's think of other creative outlets and move towards this, protection and safety.
Nice.
Great points.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and, letting us talk to you about it from a different perspective than how we normally talk about things on our podcast. So thank you so much.
I am happy to support any mindset elements to help the world and progress forward and humanity. And you've done such tremendous work. So I'm happy to help however I can. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So before we go, are we still correct in the flex that we are still the only husband and wife team that works on this, or have we got any new ones?
I have some clients and private clients too that work with me as husband wife teams, but you're few and far between. You've been with me the longest flex.
Nice.
Maybe you've inspired others flex.
Maybe. That's a good flex to have. I'd like to be an inspiration for sure.
Yeah, and honestly, like to the level you both take it, from my leadership courses to the day-to-day application to the way you go through life, you're a really amazing example of what's possible. So thank you for being in the journey.
Awesome. All right. So in our notes, we will put a link into school. Is that the best place to do the link?
Probably just Strong Confident Living.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll put
I
a
think
link
just the
in.
main website, because that way, it says
If anybody absolutely resonates with what we've just talked about today and wants to check out Laura a little more, we highly recommend her, because we're almost 4 years into this and still going strong. So
it's a never-ending journey of mindset. There's always another layer to learn about yourself when you're on the self-awareness path, right? Yeah. It just keeps going. But I do love working with you both, and I thank you again.
Yeah,
thank you.
And there you have it. So that was Laura St. John, our mindset coach. And that was really fun. I enjoyed talking with her about this.
Yeah, I thought it was really fun. And if I could identify anything that I would hope that our listeners would get out of it, is this idea of, just like an athlete, you don't just show up for game day or for the competition. You have to kind of put in the effort to prepare yourself for it. And I think that we need to look at how can we prepare to get through this certainty gap.
Yeah.
However we define it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole. We hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, thank you so much to all of our new and returning listeners. As the great Ted Lasso says, we appreciate you. We would like to give Laura St. John a huge thank you for participating in this episode. She's a wonderful inspiration, and we really appreciate all of the work that she does. In the notes of this episode, we will provide a link to her webpage if anything she said resonates with you and you'd like to learn more. Also, as we mentioned earlier, we will provide links to up-to-date information and resources with regards to this Cyclospora outbreak. If you have any questions or wish to give us feedback directly, please email us at pepnexusinfo@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole is sponsored by Eagle Protect, the only glove company that third-party tests its gloves because, trust us, isn't a food safety strategy. Learn more at www.eagleprotect.com and safeguard what matters. Is there anything else you wish to say, Darin?
Wait, are you telling me this is the end of the episode?
It's the end of the episode. We're wrapping it up.
Agree to disagree.
Ew.